Hey guys, Ed Haynes here to talk about the new training priorities for the Competitors Strength and Conditioning Program. Going to change up the format a little bit to try and condense the information in this video. I know you guys want to sit here all day listening to me rabble on about the same things each week. So what we'll start by talking about our last training cycle and some of the things we found there. We'll talk about the next training cycle and what our focus and priority is going to be. And then we'll just have some general concluding comments. First and foremost, it should be of interest to you guys that there has been some big changes in our sport in terms of how the competitive season is run. It's really, really important that we do our own research there and find out what the changes are and how it might potentially impact you. We have just put out a video on the Coastal Fitness YouTube podcast where we kind of share some of our thoughts on that. So if anywhere, that's probably a great place to start. Let's start by reviewing your last training block. So we've just finished a 4-week intensification cycle. Now, with regards to the sport of CrossFit, intensification is typically referring to a training phase which is is focusing more on heavier loads in terms of our weightlifting pieces, so higher intensities. It's more sport specific in terms of the movement selection. In terms of the energy system training or the conditioning pieces, again, more sport specific, perhaps more complexity in those pieces. With regards to testing, we had kind of 3 main tests that we sprinkled in that last couple of weeks. And I just wanted to start by reviewing those tests and kind of where we're at as a training group. First and foremost, we tested the clean and jerk. Some really, really good results here, guys. By far, as a group, this is the strongest we've been across the board. Females were averaging 70 kilograms for our clean and jerk, and males were averaging 100 kilograms. So first and foremost, that's a great percentage ratio in terms of males versus females. As an entire training group, we're all pretty much on the same wavelength there. Now, we do have a lot more outliers in this group. So we have some big clean and jerks and some clean and jerks that sit below that average. So what I've tried to do in these averages is kind of not factor in those kind of outliers and kind of look at the main training group as a whole. Whilst this is the highest our clean and jerks have ever been as a group, it's still a priority for us for sure. Our clean and jerk wasn't a pure test in the sense that the instructions were to max out. So I've kind of taken into account that we could maybe perhaps hit 5 to 10% more of what we hit there. But generally speaking, really good, but we're going to continue to address this as a priority. Kipping handstand push-ups, this is probably, this really brought a smile to my face when I looked at the results coming in here. 75% of all of our competitors hit a new PR in our AMRAP kipping handstand push-up test. Now, granted, I understand that some of you may not have done the test before, so entering anything was going to give you a gold star, but it's still great to see anyway. So when you look at the actual results, females were hitting an average of 25 unbroken repetitions. That is huge relative to what we've hit in the past. And also bearing in mind that our training group is always growing. So if the training group can still grow and the averages still increase, that's a great sign. We did have some really big outliers. We had a couple of girls in the 40s and 50s actually doing a lot more reps than the men, so that's great to see. But again, I tried to kind of keep these averages based upon the bulk of the training group. Gentlemen, we're averaging about 25 repetitions as well, so very similar to the ladies. So like, I have to say, ladies, hats off to you here. Again, we did have a few outliers. For sure, handstand push-ups, high volume gymnastics capacity is still going to be a priority for us to be competitive in the sport. It's really important that we have the handstand push-ups, things like pull-ups and muscle-ups and all those higher skill gymnastics pieces dialed in, and we're able to express not only big first all-out sets, but also the ability to repeat. So if we looked at our drop-off scores as a group, they were quite high. So I'd like to bring both that first score up, but also that repeat score. Our last test was a clean grip deadlift. We did a set of 3 female averages. We all PR'd that, and again, perhaps it was because we hadn't hit a heavy set of 3 before. But our average as a female population in the competitive group is 110 kilograms. Again, a few outliers to this. And our male average is now 150 kilograms for a set of 3. Again, a few outliers. Now, this is still a priority for us. Having said that, hitting 110 for females, 150 for males as an average, which is not touch and go, is a really, really great place to be in this part of the season. Okay, moving forward to our next training phase, we're going to enter an 8-week accumulation cycle. So essentially, accumulation work is the opposite to intensification work. So we're doing higher repetitions with our training work, with our strength work, which means at lower intensity loads. We're going to increase the amount of kind of strength training variance. So we're not just going to really hone in on one movement pattern, but we might do kind of like single leg or unilateral variations of the movement. In terms of our energy system training, a little bit more generalized, a little bit less sport specific. So that might mean less less high skill conditioning pieces, more low skill conditioning pieces, perhaps focusing more on kind of cyclical work. As we move through the 8 weeks, sorry, lost my train of thought there. As we move through the 8 weeks, we're just going to slowly evolve intensity, so we'll get a little bit more intense as we go along, a little bit more sport specific, a little bit more complex with our movement variation. In terms of specific notes on the stimulus of your training week, kind of just a few things to touch on. First, you'll notice that we've reshuffled the priorities of each training day. The reason for that is it's important we don't get too accustomed or acclimatized to a certain stimulus on a certain day. This sport is chaotic, so keeping some element of chaos in our training is actually going to lend us to be more efficient, or progress more than the sport. Similarly, obviously within the training week, Monday is going to feel fresher than a Wednesday. Wednesday, you're going to feel fresher than a Friday. So it's important that we keep on reshuffling those training days and the priorities to ensure that you have opportunities to give it your best effort on a training block. Now, the stimulus in terms of what we do on each day won't change too much within this 8 weeks, but at the end of this 8-week training cycle, we'll review our priorities again and perhaps reshuffle the days around to make sure we're giving you exposure there. We have had a little break from isolated muscle ups. Reason for that is we have been isolating the muscle up for a long time, almost kind of 12 weeks now. And sometimes when you isolate a movement and focus on it a little bit too much, it almost starts to hamper your progress when we start to kind of get a little bit neurotic with the movement, maybe frustration, maybe a bit too excited. So sometimes just by breaking away from that movement in its entirety and focusing on other things like building up, pulling strength, pushing strength, or just not even thinking about the movement altogether, sometimes that's a nice refreshing break that's necessary for long-term progress. So don't worry guys, you will not kind of lose the progress you made with muscle ups. It will be fitting back into your program in the next few weeks. On Tuesdays, we're focusing on developing strict handstand push-up strength again. I was really happy, as I said, with the kipping handstand push-up scores coming in, but an important part of this sport is being able to express strength through local muscle endurance, which is just the strict handstand push-up. Similarly, developing more capacity within the strict handstand push-ups is actually going to benefit your kipping handstand push-ups as well. So it's important that we wave in between kipping and strict, and that can apply to all movements within the sport. Wednesdays, we're actually going to give you guys a bit of a break from snatching. We've just done a lot of variations of the snatch and the power snatch over the last 16 to 20 weeks. So just for the next few weeks, actually just laying off the movement and focusing a little bit more on developing some time under tension in the overhead squat and just focusing a little bit more on positions. So I know a lot of CrossFit gyms don't have mirrors, so it's sometimes hard to see our positions and what they actually look like relative to what they feel. So great thing to do probably in the next few weeks, guys, while you're doing your overhead squat work, is just to film yourselves and review and just try to find if there's any asymmetries or imbalances, so that when we get back into our snatch work, we can be a little bit more mindful with our work. Last piece is we're going to be doing fatigue-based pulling gymnastics on our Fridays. So we've kind of isolated chest to bar, bar muscle up, ring muscle up stuff on a Tuesday for a long time. We're going to take an emphasis off just isolation of that and move it into kind of like a semi-fatigue state. There will be a period of time we'll be moving back into isolated work. So if you feel like your efficiency or your capacity isn't quite where you want it to be just yet, you will have an opportunity where we kind of focus on that again. But it is also important that we take those isolated skills and put them into mixed modal settings, because essentially that's the nature of our sport. In terms of your training week, guys, we're going on your Mondays, we're going to actually focus on squatting strength to start. So typically we've been doing cleans and Olympic lifts before our squatting work. We've noticed that our squatting strength probably as a group has come down a little bit, so we're just basically prioritizing that on a Monday. And then your barbell conditioning work on a Monday is going to be quite varied, but we're going to be keeping weights a little bit lighter there. Your accessory work on a Monday is just going to be lower body structural balance work. Tuesdays, again, I said it already, we're focusing on strict handstand push-up, absolute strength endurance. So being able to elicit bigger sets and more repetitions of strict handstand push-ups instead of trying to focus on strict handstand push-up absolute strength, which would be building something like a big deficit or putting external load on you. That's not our focus in this training block. Then we're going to be going into some aerobic threshold training. Aerobic threshold training, we're keeping it mixed modal, so kind of elements of monostructural cyclical work with gymnastics, with some weightlifting, and kind of mix mashing that in a different way, but working for short to moderate periods of times with incomplete short to moderate periods of rest. Again, we're going to keep that nice and varied for you guys, so we're giving kind of exposure to a variety of different movement patterns. Your accessory work on Tuesday is going to be straight arm gymnastic support work. I think straight arm strength is an integral part of this sport. I think most CrossFit gyms focus a little bit too much on just developing bent arm strength all the time. Straight arm strength is really important to developing the integrity of the shoulder, but also has huge carryover to things like higher skill gymnastics where there's a big straight arm element involved. Wednesdays, as I said, it's still going to be our snatch day, but we're just going to take a little break away from the snatch for a bit. We're going to focus on rebuilding some strict pulling and horizontal pressing accumulation, so kind of absolute strength endurance work, not necessarily loaded, but just kind of hitting higher reps there. We haven't done any horizontal pressing in a long time outside of accessory work, so just want to kind of give love to that movement pattern again because I think it's really important. And then your Wednesdays, we're just going to kind of do some upper body and lower body unilateral support, so single arm, single leg work. Again, this phase we're going to really focus on making sure we're not letting any imbalances creep too far out of control. Fridays, deadlift absolute strength. We're starting to reintroduce some shoulder overhead work in an isolated format. Currently, it's not touch and go, so we're not focusing on sport-specific cycling just yet. It's just getting comfortable again with just doing things like push pressing, push jerking, and split jerking. And then over the 8 weeks, that will become a little bit more sport-specific. Your conditioning piece on a Friday is going to be shorter in nature, more intense in nature. There's definitely going to be an element of gymnastics in there, probably coupled with some form of weightlifting and perhaps some monostructural exercise. Fridays, we're going to keep that varied in terms of your accessory work, but we will be focusing on accumulating more time and attention with midline or kind of odd object type work. Saturdays, current theme, we're going to keep the same with your kind of energy system 3 or aerobic, longer bouts of aerobic training. Again, keeping them quite varied. At this point in the season, because we are accumulating, it's really important we don't get too bogged down on trying to be better at the sport by doing sport-specific movements. So we're going to keep this fun and varied with things like team workouts, partner workouts, things that look a little bit less like the sport, but we want people to breathe and move really well and typically feel good at the end of the week. Now, as we evolve closer to the start of the season, again, still waiting on information there, those Saturdays will become a little bit more sport-specific. So it's important to kind of get breaks from serious training, especially at this point of the year, just to kind of mix things up and keep it fun. Okay, great guys, last piece, concluding comments. Warm up and movement prep work. Please make sure you do it. If you're training in-house, it's always posted there every day before each workout and is very specific to the stimulus ahead of you. If you're following the program remotely, highly recommend, again, following it before your workout, or if you're a coach or you're someone who has a particular interest in movement ability work, you can do your own self-guided work here, but I don't think that just getting into the training session straight away is enough to kind of bulletproof your body for long-term success. Had a few people ask about RPE because they've seen it in the notes. Just wanted to explain what that meant. RPE is rate of perceived exertion, which basically we grade on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being not very challenging, 10 being the most challenging. So that's just to give you guys an indication of how we want that set to feel, or that weightlifting piece or that energy system piece. You can kind of put it into percentages if your brain works better that way. So an 8 out of 10 would be like an 80% effort. Typically we want to reserve those 10 out of 10 efforts for when we basically test something. So typically most of our time training should be spent anywhere between the 1 to 7 or 8 RPE threshold, and reserving those 9 to 10 out of 10s where we really want to go for something. So how a 7 or 8 out of 10 should feel There should be no compromise in movement quality, and we should be able to do a couple more reps after our last repetition. If it's a 10 out of 10, we're kind of tinkering on that edge or that fine line of movement integrity, but we definitely shouldn't be able to do any more repetitions or give any more effort after that. Accessory work, remember guys, it's an expectation that you all do it, and I hope you do that. It is not necessarily hard conditioning work to give you guys more volume with regards to your capacity. It's more right now at this point of the season focused on structural balance, making sure we're not creating any biases to a certain movement pattern, developing things like trunk stability and straight arm strength. So again, if you have people in your gym who are following this program with you and they aren't in the competitors group, this is for everyone to do. I think everyone will benefit from it. Very last thing from me guys is make sure you stay on top of your movement work. We've got a few avenues to kind of explore here. If you're, well, firstly, social media and YouTube has a ton of resources that are very valuable and very effective. All you got to do is just search for the right keywords and you'll have a multitude of different sources to kind of feed from. I always recommend finding someone that you like who puts good content out there and just kind of check in every now and then to see if they're putting anything new. And if they do put something new, by all means experiment and play with it. Doesn't just because we prescribe accessory work doesn't mean it's the best thing for you necessarily, or if you have a particular interest in something else, by all means go ahead and explore that. Other things you can do are things like guided meditation, investing in something like ROMWOD, which is taking you through like a guided stretch session. If you have access to physiotherapists or PTs if you're in the US, or massage therapists, make sure you're getting some weekly maintenance work done. I don't think that tissue therapists should be used reactively when you get an injury, but it should be just kind of a part of your every week regime to make sure you're staying healthy. Last thing is just kind of doing your own self-guided foam rolling or static stretching or flow type routines. Yeah, that is also obviously a great thing to do. Guys, that's it from me. Thank you very much for tuning in. Love all your hard work. Thank you so much for being diligent with logging your scores. I really appreciate it, and it allows us to prescribe a training program that's much more catered to you. If you do have any questions with regards to anything in your training, please reach out to me personally or any of the coaching team at Coastal Fitness, and we'll try and help you out as best we can. All right, guys, have a great day.